Hello and welcome to this fascinating session we're going to have around the potential of women to accelerate recovery in the economy across the region. We have a great panel that you can see in front of you here, and they will introduce themselves in a moment. But you may be asking the question, why is it an all-female panel? If we're talking about women, shouldn't we have some other representation, because this is a kind of diversity topic? Well, you'll see across our programme, in some areas we have all-male panels, and we do try to mix it up as much as we can, because it's great to have that diversity of thought, but it's not always possible. So we thought, why not have an all-female panel? Because that's in itself diverse. We don't often see one of those. So I hope you'll enjoy this session. And without further ado, I'd like to invite my panelists, Halina, Bernard, Sherie, Morais, Princy, Royce, and Diana Wilde to introduce themselves. So I'll start in alphabetical order and ask Diana to tell us a little bit about herself and why she's passionate about this subject.
Sure. So thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you for having me today. So I'm the co-founder of Aurora 50. We launched this year. We work very closely with ESCA, the regulator, to increase female representation at board level. And we launched an initiative this year called Pathway 20 that essentially supports women in their first board roles. So for us, this is very much in the DNA, and it really goes back to my roots with the ACT. So for what I'm very grateful for, we were running Women in Finance events from 2016, I think it was. And that's what really made me acutely aware of the situation, the fact that we're really dealing with a broken system. And that's what made me passionate about it. So delighted to be with you today.
Great stuff, Diana. Thank you. Halina, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me here as well. And it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to have a conversation about this topic. My name is Halina Bernard, and I'm head of treasury at General Motors, Middle East and Africa. I'm pretty, very much passionate about this particular topic, in particular when we have seen a lot of efforts made for, increasing women participation in the workforce. The sad part of it that the recent pandemic has actually, created some dent into the overall efforts. I feel fortunate as one of the women to, work in a treasury and finance, and being pretty much, again, still a very male-dominated, department as finance. Nonetheless, I do believe women have great skills, and they can offer a lot and bring great ideas and innovation into treasury and finance.
Super. Thanks very much, Halina. And over to Princy now, please.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Princy Royce, Regional Treasurer for Middle East in India for National Oilwell Varco. Been in the Middle East all my life, and this topic is really interesting, especially as we go through these unprecedented times. There's a lesson learned on endurance, resilience, and above all, human touch to addressing a problem. So what used to be a fiery rat race is now slowed down, completely shut, and improved. And what emerges from this is the learning that the skill of adaptability and human touch, compassionate approach to a situation creates the solutions much needed. And this is where I believe that women are far more equipped with this immaculate skill, which is trained right from childhood by accepting and sharing the multiple responsibilities of being a daughter, a sister, a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, and so many different hats at the same time. So being a woman, I'm proud of it, and I'm proud of my fellow women who have encountered these various circumstances and perform these different roles on a daily basis that actually train them very well for work life and real life crisis.
Indeed, it's a fascinating point, actually. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, of course, that those countries with female leaders have done particularly well through COVID-19. which is an interesting thought there. I'll move on now, though, to Sherie, please.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. My name's Sherie Morais. I'm Head of Transaction Banking Sales within Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank. This is a very passionate subject to me. During my career, I've come across a number of leaders and managers that have helped me shape myself and my career path, which has really also influenced my personal life as well. Some of the most influential of these have been women that I have in particular worked for, which has given me the confidence to strive to be the best that I can be. It's important for me to share this experience with others and to help them in terms of their career aspirations. It's also important for me to kind of look at the strong role models that are there, to be a strong role model to my daughters, who have both developed a very good level of confidence, watching myself in terms of my own work environment, and also the strength in terms of the work ethic that this also brings. So it has both a professional and a personal element to this.
Oh, thanks very much, Sherie. And I think it's fantastic that you all have joined us today, because I think you are each as individuals are great role models for other women. So thanks again. I'll stay with you, Sherie, for our first question, which is really around what's your personal view as to how or why women can help accelerate the recovery, and what is it that needs to happen to enable them to do that?
Okay, I think there's a couple of points here, to be quite honest. I believe really that women have shown resilience, and also this has been evidenced in many different ways throughout the pandemic, especially in the case of like working mothers, for example. Women have a natural level of tolerance, empathy, patience, and this translates really very well into the workplace and within the leadership roles that they may have. The uncertainty, is continuing. As mentioned, we're seeing uncertainty just in terms of the economic environment. We've got the US elections that are happening. So things are still very prevalent in terms of uncertainty. But I think women in leadership positions can promote balance, equality, stability, and resilience in these uncertain times, especially where there is anxious work environments and anxiety within teams. I think also women, I believe, bring a balance on both the emotional and intellectual and professional sides of management. I think in terms of what they need to have the doors open to them is confidence to have a voice, to be able to articulate and to be listened to, ensuring that the door open policy is used, but also is used in a constructive way to get their points across.
Absolutely. So a bit of a call to action for others to support their female colleagues there, Sherie. Thank you. Princy, any thoughts that you have you'd like to build on? Do you agree with what Sherie's just said?
I absolutely agree with Sherie, and women are so pragmatic, resilient, and they actually maneuver through these tricky situations with grace. And however, I also believe in strong partnerships with fellow women and men as well, which are very imperative to achieve results. And I think women again have that acumen to build and maintain and manage relationships better. The past couple of decades, we've seen deep and ugly economic cycles increase, wallet none close to what we're seeing currently. So we all know there's only recovery from here, but how and how soon are pertinent questions. But from what we see, tougher battles have been fought better by women. Country leaders like you mentioned, Caroline, Jacinta Ardern, Angela Merkel, Sanna Marin, Tsai Ing-wen, they have fared much better than their male counterparts. Now, be cautious in drawing conclusions from a few. The fact is that they do offer valuable leadership lessons. And I believe that if women are offered similar roles and greater inclusion policies across the world, then we could see a revolution change in the theories of leadership and empathy. I think a positive step towards this is the United's Women Rise for All movement, just lately set up to gather across different sectors and generations to examine how women's leadership is shaping the pandemic response and recovery that would benefit a lot of people. Now, this could provide great insights and even promote the equality of women's rights and benefit the society as a whole.
Absolutely, and I think the whole social media. I was speaking with Louis Theroux the other day, and he was talking about the marinade of social media and how things kind of percolate and ferment, and people think about things a lot. And I think that can be very helpful for these kinds of movements. And as you say, female leadership, looking at those qualities and starting to talk about it, because the more something is talked about and the more normal it becomes, the more accepted it is. And that's the thing. And when we start to see other people doing things, we like as humans to join in. So I think there might be a little bit of an impetus through this this pandemic that helps all of that and helps the new style of leadership that's maybe more appropriate for the future. But I'll move on to Diana now for your thoughts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of this has started to be seen in the boardroom as well. And the questions are being asked by C-suites. The board's asking whether we have the right executive team in place to actually manage for the future. And it's one of those cases where, you know, we knew before the pandemic that if we were to reach gender parity in the region, it would equate to $101 billion worth of additional GDP. And now with the pandemic, we're looking at it and saying, okay, hold on a minute. Do we actually have the right leadership in place? And how can we actually accelerate and ensure that the women that currently aren't working at the same level as the men are actually brought into that? So I think it's just created that impetus for us to do even more, really, to get women engaged.
Absolutely. Thanks, Diana. And maybe if I move to Halina, you're a numbers person, and I'm sure you're interested in getting that GDP up. What are your thoughts, Halina?
Well, as per my introduction, I mean, as mentioned, unfortunately, during the pandemic, the sectors that have been impacted the most are the sectors where women have the greatest representation, and therefore the job losses, just looking at the statistic on the high level, are significantly larger for women than for male population, which means that immediately translates into a GDP, negative impact. On the higher level, based on various research I was reading through, one of them being World Trade Organization. For the 2021, the forecast is, and I'm talking global, I know we're focusing more on GCC, but looking at the global level, the entire impact of women layoffs, and it has translated into a forecasted 1.2% of negative GDP. Now, with obviously there are several aspects around the sectors impacted and the need for the immediate reaction and adjustment to cost, etc. So from my perspective, what I would look at thoughts around the policies and the fiscal stimulus when it comes to the pandemic. One of the aspects could be looking at the potential, supporting the organization who would provide paid leave to the caregiver, while women in particular are the first impacted, who would either would have to voluntarily leave the employment or opt for a part-time, potentially, considering that they would need to take care of children with the lockdown and the potential impact going forward. So therefore, a greater focus on policies and flexible working arrangement to support the women, maintaining the employment, and therefore indirect impacting the GDP.
Indeed. Yeah, no, thank you very much. And we'll come back a little bit later to talk about policy a little bit more. But staying with you, Halina, it's a little bit troubling, isn't it, what we've seen then through COVID-19, and we are seeing not only the layoffs, but as you say, society kind of expects the woman when working from home, for instance, to be looking after the home, and therefore it puts maybe additional burdens there. I mean, do you feel that we are seeing things that are, already enhancing female representation in these times? Are people addressing this issue, or do you feel it's still a male-dominated world and we're just not doing enough?
Overall, a lot has been done over the past, in particular, 10 to 20 years. I do, considering the overall sectors, I do feel there is still a lot to be done, and the progress, it's not as significant I would like to see. Overall, as we have seen, and we look at the media and reports, women are still predominantly occupying positions which are lower paid, and beyond the mid sort of level managerial career, there's much slower progress to the executive positions, where obviously where we would like women to to be considered and have a proper career program and support from overall the leadership of the organization. So this is still very much on the HR and top level agenda, and a lot of deadlines have been imposed to sort of look at the greater gender balance per department or per specific sector. I still think there is much more to be done. It's not as fast progress on that front. And the overall, when we look at the labor force, percentage gap, the gap has not significantly reduced over the past couple of decades. We are still at about 50% of the gap when it comes to MENA region, for example.
Absolutely, and I don't think we're alone in the region with all these issues. If you'd like to look up, there's a BCG TED Talk, and she references some study they did in Germany, and it's quite interesting looking back over the last 2 decades, and it tracks how women have basically been more educated over the last 2 decades, and you see the education line going upwards over 20 years. Then you see the line of how you would expect that to equate with positions, seniority of positions within organizations, which kind of tracks it, follows it up. Then you look at what's actually happened over the last 20 years, and it's almost absolutely flat. And you think, gosh, all these 20 years, in my experience, for 20 years, since my Unilever days, talking about diversity, having initiatives, doing things, and yet in some parts of the world, not only here in the region, it's just not happening. So it will be very interesting to see that through these unprecedented, I know we don't always like to use that word, it's been used a lot, but they are unprecedented times, and whether there will be a change and whether there will be something that comes out of this that is good for that greater balance. But I'll just move on to back to Princy now for her thoughts.
Sure. I can speak on behalf of the oil and gas sector, where I'm from, and the most prominent sector in the Middle East, where the oil and gas sector actually sees a huge disparity when it comes to gender balance, and that's mainly rural. As per a McKinsey study, only a third of entry-level employees in the oil and gas industry are female, compared to 48% for the corporate sector as a whole. So there may be also some biases in the form of cultural misperceptions of women's abilities in the region, and you have it's very common to perceive women as better facilitators and collaborators, and they encourage to step into staff roles and limit to that. So the industry is also renowned for hurdles in promotion of women from entry levels to managers. And then the next hurdle is from senior managers to the C-suite. So only 2% of C-suite leaders in ONG are actually women. And this is definitely being changed with the demographic change in the workforce, with Gen Z coming into the labor force and the importance that they attach to diversity. Further, the challenge that the industry throws in these times warrant a totally different set of eyes, to look at been operating, and it would be ideal to engage more women as decision makers. In terms of NOV, I've seen a lot of women in senior positions, and that's a construct to balance the gender gap. And I believe personally for my organization, we're moving in the right direction.
Well, that's very reassuring to hear, Princy. Sherie, the banking sector, where do they stand, or where does it stand?
I mean, definitely, there's a lot of change. I mean, you would have seen just in terms of some of the banking, RBS has a strong woman CEO. You've got Starling Bank with another strong woman CEO. So you're really seeing some changes definitely at the top level within banking. I think, yeah, definitely more can be done. Within our bank, we have good representation across all levels. But yes, again, and more opportunity and more could be done specifically. But I think just in terms of where looking at the pandemic itself and how this has helped, I think, change perhaps some of the perceptions, especially when it's working from home, especially with young children, taking care of children and also being able to work. And also I think our male counterparts, have probably more of an appreciation as well, having not being able to go to the office and working from home, and seeing what actually goes on behind the scenes, as well as some women having to hold down a full-time job. So I think that's been actually quite good. And I think that will help us as we move forward and pass this pandemic into whatever the new normal may look like. But I actually think it's had some quite positive bearings in terms of being given the flexibility. And that in itself, by giving the flexibility, will enable more to step up, to say that I want to be counted in terms of my next career move, where perhaps they may not have done, given the fact of their home environment, for example.
Indeed, some great points made there, and there's nothing like experiencing something for learning. So it's great that those men who may have not really experienced home life as intensively as they are doing now have learned some positive things that are helping support their partners, etc., their wives, their children, and their daughters, and so on. But let's move to Diana to reflect on board level now, if we may.
Sure. So for us, this year was a very, very big year, obviously, with the launch of the initiative. But what was striking for me when we started this was actually that there were a lot of treasurers that we were seeing at board level, and we've been looking specifically at career paths and kind of trying to understand, are there specific skills that are really helping to elevate women onto those boards, and that boards are looking for more so than others, and finding men or women with those skill sets. And I think one of the things that's happened as well over this period is obviously the boards had to completely change the way that they're working as well. So just like we have been, they're working remotely and having to do all of this remotely, and it makes you question the way things are done, and much has changed. They've also had to look at how they support their executive teams and making sure that that there's a good balance there, and that they're supporting and guiding them. And obviously they're questioning whether or not they have the right people in place. We've really talked a little bit about those female leaders around the world that are really showing that women really do add value. And I think all of this adds to changing mindsets. When anything like, when something as big as this happens, you do take a step back and you start thinking about whether this is actually the way you want your life to be, the way that you want your working life to be, and the way the organization that you're working in should be running. And I think one of the benefits, as Sherie was pointing out, is that people did have had that opportunity to sit back and say, maybe my views on flexible working hours are a little bit out of date. Maybe this is something that we actually can work with a little bit more moving forward. Certainly going to be very interesting to see the statistics when we get them. It's definitely changing. I think one of the big things that I've noticed though this year, just because of the people we've been working with, is that those who were already championing women, who already understood that diversity of thought is necessary, that it drives innovation, that it improves profitability, they were the quicker ones to move and to say, we need to actually make sure we're supporting our staff. And they were very, very pragmatic in their approach and very swift in their action with it. I think some of the benefits that we'll see are things like, if you look at the ed tech industry, this is absolutely going to boom. It is booming. It is, that's fundamentally changed. Whereas a year ago, and there are often more women in this space because of the education link, that was kind of slow to take off. So I do think it's kind of giving us the opportunity to reset the way we're thinking, and a great opportunity for managers as well, and senior leadership to really think twice about who they're supporting and how they're supporting their staff. So we're hoping obviously to see a lot of this shifting in mindset having an impact on the boardroom, and I think there's been a lot of thought about that in the last 6 months, as boards really have faced unprecedented times. So yeah, we do expect it to see it changing, and certainly with the interactions that we're having with the boards and C-suite, we're hearing a lot more of this, and we're getting a lot more questions of, okay, well, how do we develop that pipeline? How do we support women into these roles? And sometimes it's the really simple things that they're just not realizing that they can do. And an example for that is making sure that women have roles where they are managing things like P&L, and they're responsible for resources, and sometimes too early in their career they're going into areas that it's going to take them a long time to really get into those leadership roles, just because of the nature of the exposure that they get to whether it's business functions or profit and loss. And so yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for us to all sit back and think about how we actually want our working worlds to be, and that gives us the opportunity to really change it. But it has to start today, whilst this is going on, rather than if we're going to reset.
Absolutely, fantastic points there, Diana, and it is a huge opportunity. Though people often talk about getting back to normal, or then they'll say the new normal, and I just wonder, I often say I like to reflect on the next normal, because things are continually changing, and we are seeing things that people thought were impossible are very possible. But I do hope it's not going to be a boomerang motion. We go back to something, it all gets forgotten once we move to wherever we're moving, wherever we're heading. So let's hope that we grasp these opportunities and really make some change for good, so to speak. But just staying with you, Diana, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about what progress is being made across the UAE in terms of law and regulation in this area, and how governments and businesses can work together to ensure that we are, helping women to have greater representation where it's needed.
Absolutely, and I think the most important thing is, first of all, understanding where we're at. So if you look at the listed companies in the UAE currently, the female representation only accounts for 3.5%. Now that's obviously not the goal. The goal is clearly written out by the Gender Balance Council and by ESCA, the regulator, as 20%. And we have a comply or explain legislation in place. So they are supposed to have 20% women on their boards. But obviously we're at 3.5%. So there's a very long way to go. I think when it comes to boards, there's always a discussion around quotas, and there's always a it's the first thing that normally comes up is, should there be more quotas? What should we be enforcing? But sadly, one of the things that COVID's also pointed out is that quotas aren't always the answer either. If you look at Germany at the moment, they do have a quota system, and for the first time, their numbers are going in the wrong direction. So some people have clearly thought the best way is to go back to what we know, and I think this is the point that you were making, Caroline. This isn't the way forward, and we have to make sure that we continue to take steps. With the numbers being where they're at, though, for the listed boards here, I also don't think that's a true reflection of the potential that already exists in the UAE. And you have to kind of remember how large those exchanges are in comparison to the big businesses that are in the UAE, and the same's reflected in other parts of the GCC as well. What's wonderful really is the amount of investment and support that does come from the government and senior leadership, especially for the nationals, in terms of making sure that they are developing, that they are getting the support and the exposure that they need at a very early age. What's been striking, I think, is if you look at boards around the world, the age difference is quite substantial. So, it does make me wonder whether, the golf has the opportunity to really lead in that phase as well, because we do have some extraordinary young people in this country who are very, very gifted and very talented, who are getting board experience. We just haven't seen that really shift yet with regards to the listed boards, but they are being supported in other areas, whether it's the federal boards, the private sector as well. So I believe the federal boards are nearly at 20%. So there's quite a big difference between what's happening in the private sector and within government. But on the whole, there's from the World Bank was in mind, and all of the GCC countries have really been pushing to ensure that women are better supported, and the World Bank suggested a number of different ways that countries can do this. But some of these things we've talked about already today. It's about making sure that women can actually be part of the workforce. It's about getting them early and ensuring that they're on the right path if they're very ambitious, and then making sure that they get that support. And I do feel men are a huge part of making sure that happens. And what's lovely in this part of the world is that we now see the patriarchs of the big family businesses, for example, sitting back and saying, I want my daughters to have the same opportunities as my sons. And this is where I think that shift is starting to occur, really.
Fantastic, and also loved your point about basically age diversification, because it's so often the case that people think, oh, we've got the experience, you have to be older, and not understanding, thinking back when you were 20 years younger, you had a lot to offer. So we have to really watch out for that kind of tendency towards ageism, don't we? Just before we move on to another question, though, just touch on any other thoughts from Sherie on this point about how governments and businesses can work together better.
I mean, definitely. I think we're seeing a lot more, and Diana's highlighted some of the elements there, but definitely we're seeing a lot more willingness to work together, to understand the problems, to challenge each other, to share experiences as well. I think that's also very important. And I think the other element is working together in terms of looking at training, identifying the talent, and providing them with the relevant mentors across varying organisations to support these developments. Because, it's not about just working in the vertical, it's just about, being represented across many boards, and giving that level of exposure, support, And I know Diana's been working and her business has been working very hard in terms of what kind of training that we can give to support these businesses take confidence and to give the opportunity to those as well. So definitely there's a willingness and a desire. Yes, more needs to be done, but we're at the start of a road, and I think everyone has made a conscious decision to move down it. So for me, I think that only leads to great things to happen in the future.
Thanks, Sherie. And of course, the point you make, support is vital. Putting people in positions and then not supporting them, they're alone, likely to fail. And then it just reinforces those false perceptions. So really, really important to get mentoring in place, to get people supported, and to have a community kind of there rooting for them. And as you see, we'll touch on this a little bit later, allies are really, really important. We are getting close to the end of this session, though, so I'm going to move on quickly to a really important point, which is around, just reflect a little bit more on the benefits of diversity. And I certainly have followed statistics over the years that, and very recent studies, again and again, they show that having diversity in your teams, having diversity on the board, having diversity in the executive team, that all ties in and correlates absolutely to innovation and growth. So it's really, really important for businesses and for their bottom line. But I'd like to turn first of all to Princy to ask, what have you heard out there, and what evidence do you think there is to say that it's really important that women have a greater representation in the region?
Sure, there are various studies in this regard. Morgan Stan has found out that companies with a higher gender diversity index had better stock performance with less volatility and better return on equity. Harvard Business School has also analyzed and researched on the company's market value and revenue and how that rises when their diversity policies are implemented. Further, various venture capital firms have also adhered to the fact that when VCs increase the number of women on their teams, they see an increase in the return on the funds and have more profitable exits. So it goes on, and these are studied, researched, and established facts that learn from. A company in this regard would be, for example, Procter & Gamble, where they have propagated a VC Equal campaign, which was designed to fight gender bias and work towards equality for all. Now, the company has made a history of promoting the issue and records 45% of its managers and a third of its board as women. So P&G's clear dedication to equality within its own workforce meant that the campaign came across as authentic and push for change. So gender diversity increases alignment towards your customer's need due to the factor of empathy. There's also a study from PwC which showed that 61% of women and 49% of men look at the diversity of an organization's leadership team when evaluating a job. Also, having a homogeneous leadership team can impact whether or not the company will get the talent it wants. So you have improved innovation, alignment to customer needs, recruitment of the best. All in all, impacts the company's bottom line, and you reap benefits from there.
Thank you very much, Princy. Very, very well summarised there. Halina, would you like to add anything about those benefits of having a diverse team?
Absolutely. As we already have had some examples and discussions, having a diverse team, the team becomes much more engaged. I believe women have a lot to offer. Things like adaptability, multitasking, creativity. Women also, as we are all consumers as well. So just having a right gender balance and having women participating in some of the product decisions and as well as product development, etc. Those are just one of the few examples. It's really it brings a great benefit to the organization because we're not one-sided. We have that great input from both gender. So that's pretty much how I summarize and view it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Halina. And of course, it's not about women trying to take over the world. It's about balance. We're not suggesting that there isn't a place for men and both genders to be very represented. So thanks for pointing that out, Halina. Sherie, your thoughts on the benefits you've seen?
I mean, in terms of the benefits I'm seeing, I mean, specifically in our industry, just in terms of working with a more diversified team really supports in terms of views and opinions. It really helps kind of understand and navigate around some of the elements that you're required to navigate around. I think it gives a very good balance across the business. So, I mean, that's really everything that I'm seeing. I think, and the more we can get, the more we need to do, in all honesty.
Thanks, Sherie. Diana, any few words from you on this?
Sure. I think, a clear indicator for us was when Goldman Sachs said, we're not going to IPO a company unless there's diversity at board level. And that, that came out at the beginning of this year, I believe. And they're now looking at saying it's not just going to be one woman at board level, it's going to be a minimum of 2 women at board level. And they're not doing that because they believe in the social justice. They're doing that very much because they see it in the numbers that it works better. So I think the mindset and the awareness around the economic reasons for doing this is now becoming much more normal. But the opportunity really is the most attractive thing. And I think now that we see more women being supported in terms of venture capital, in terms of the financing, and government's doing a lot to look at how do we make sure that women get the same opportunities when they're dealing with procurement departments. Are we ensuring that they get the same sort of funding? Because we see it in the numbers that there are challenges here, and the banking sector has a huge role to play in that. And if you have women within the bank itself as well, that really helps too, because they understand their customers better. So it's I think it is something that now that the whole system is shifting, people are starting to realize that we're not talking about equity. We're not talking about equality. We're talking about equity. We're talking about making sure that people have the same opportunities, and that's really something that has been an easier conversation, I think, than sometimes the way it's perceived is that we want to have, for example, all female boards. That wouldn't work either. So we do need to strike a balance with this, and I think there's some really, really valid points in everything that the panel's brought to this. It's interesting to hear.
Thanks very much, Diana. And I think that's absolutely right. I was go for the word equity rather than equality. We're not all equal, but we have to be treated fairly. And I think your point also on boards, a kind of token woman on a board simply isn't enough. You need a little bit of critical mass. And they say once you have 2 women, then it does change the dynamics of the board very positively. And the feedback I've heard over the years from men in particular is that they have found their boards transformed and really enjoyed them more when there's been a balance. And certainly my experience on boards such as Unilever Thailand, we had a very balanced board, and we were one of the few across the world that were growing double-digit growth at the time. And I put it down to that diversity of thought, and it was just an enjoyable experience as well, working with a diverse group of colleagues. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today, but I'd like to really thank you all very much for joining us on this panel. Diana, Princy, Halina and Sherie, it's been fabulous. You've brought some great insights to the table, and I hope we can encourage our allies out there, both men and women, to support the cause and ensure we get a better balance across the region in terms of gender diversity in the future, to help bring us through this and recover effectively and efficiently. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.